I'm Kira Cleveland, and this is Human Intelligence. With my co-host, Ned Hayes, we talk about the importance of human creativity in the age of AI. Welcome to the future. Human Intelligence is happy to welcome Christopher Johnson to the show today. He's a linguist, writer, and language technologist with over 20 years of experience solving technical and creative problems, including deep work in machine learning and linguistics. He holds a PhD in linguistics from UC Berkeley. His work has ranged from developing annotation workflows to train deep learning models for conversational AI to defining linguistic criteria for identifying misinformation in social media. So just want to say welcome to the show today, Christopher. Really excited to have you.
Thank you, Kira, and thank you for inviting me. It's really nice to be here. And I'm super excited about your organization. It sounds like something I believe in very strongly. So
certainly appreciate it. Well, to kick things off, I'd love to start by defining generative AI itself. You're a linguist, so what is generative AI?
Well, generative AI it gets defined in a lot of different ways, but it's a type of artificial intelligence that's based on what are often referred to as foundation models. The idea is that the artificial intelligence is created not through supervised machine learning, which was behind most previous AI, but it's simply based on statistical analysis of cultural artifacts, whether they're texts or images or videos. And then those can, the way the models work, they can actually generate images that look, similar in ways to images that the model has been trained on, or can create texts or can create videos.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention too that their whole field was really kicked into high gear by that paper, Attention is All You Need, which really changed how people thought about the transformer model. Could you speak to that very briefly?
Honestly, my involvement with generative AI has not been much on the technical side. Most of the work that I've done has been focused on doing annotation for supervised machine learning. Generative AI is something that kind of disrupted employment opportunities for me. That might be one gentle way of putting it.
Interesting. Okay, so is it fair to say that it's just a stochastic parrot or a text extrusion machine, like Emily Bender says?
Yes, Emily has said those things, and I agree with those evaluations, certainly. The thing that is the most interesting and frustrating to me I'm going to focus now on large language models since I'm a linguist, is this assumption that people make that the model has ideas or concepts that it's communicating. And there's no scientific basis for that. There's only statistical analysis of word distributions in text relative to other words. Everything is based on that. So it's all about number crunching on, cultural artifacts that are used without permission or compensation.
That's a whole rabbit hole we could go down. But just to stay on that for a second, I think, if I can play devil's advocate for a second, I think that some of the people who are working in large language models actually believe that the human brain is a sort of statistical model. And they think that, we're getting close to reasoning by just doing this. And what you're saying is, no, they are not the same thing. Is that fair?
That is absolutely fair. And yes, there are people who believe it or claim to believe it, such as Ilya Sutskever, if I'm saying his name correctly, who is one of the founders of OpenAI. And he has made claims that, something happens to turn these patterns, these statistical patterns, into something resembling human concepts. And I just don't think there's any basis for that. And I have reasons for believing that, but they have more to do with my training in linguistics and somewhat in cognitive science and in child language acquisition. And so I hear claims like this a lot, and they're very frustrating too.
Yeah. I can imagine. And, I understand Elon Musk is also one of those people who seem to believe in a reasoning LLM. And, pre-Elon Musk, you were the analytical linguist in human computation at Twitter. What was Twitter like then, and how has it changed?
Twitter was it had sort of an amazing company culture. Most of the people who were working there were very proud to be there. I had not worked at Twitter for very long, so I was hired as an analytical linguist by another who was my manager for a certain period. Then she went on leave and she never returned. So then I ended up being the only analytical linguist in human computation at Twitter. And so this was during the period when Musk was planning to do the takeover, basically. And so people were very nervous about that. And then, of course, many people got fired after Musk took over, myself included. I was not a full-time employee. I was a contractor. I was working as a contractor, but I had just had my contract renewed for a second year. I was so excited.
Oh,
And then I was out. And also, most of the people I'd been working with were out as well.
got
So
it.
those are the changes that were the most personal to me. I think that the platform has changed because Elon Musk has decided that the kind of work that we were doing was not important, and that was work that was geared toward trying to make the content on the site safe and non-harmful.
I get that. And you spoke about the misunderstanding of LLM, and you have written that generative AI is evil because it treats information as a commodity cut off from human sources. So it destroys the foundations of scholarship and truth finding. That makes it, as you've said before, a dangerous tool for techno fascism. Could you tell us more about that?
Well, that
David.
that is what I said. But let me give you an example of the type of thing that concerns me a lot. And this is sort of a simple illustrative example. We used to use Google search a lot to look up things we were interested in, and it was great because you'd get a list of links, and then these were all leading to other sources of information. So you could find a link to a source that looked reputable, and you could evaluate the information using all the human and social tools we have to evaluate truth in the information that we take in. So, but now Google is really pushing people to rely on the AI summaries that come back at the top of search results. I believe that it's not merely a benevolent convenience. I believe that they're training people to become dependent on the AI so that they can be the de facto provider of information for most people, about almost anything. And that's really dangerous because, as we've seen, the tech companies have not demonstrated any desire to resist what's going on politically in the United States right now with Donald Trump's regime. And so they're in bed with the techno fascists, Trump and Elon Musk together. So it's very disturbing to me. But I'm focusing a lot on the issues that concern me as a linguist, as a former scholar, and the kind of social aspect of generative AI, which has people depending on and just trusting the models that they're interacting with without any real basis for the trust.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So, what builds trust when you are creating a culture or a language?
What builds trust when you're creating a culture or language? Well, one thing that's important is the idea that we can verify where information is coming from. We can verify the motivations of the people who created the information, whether or not they're trustworthy. So we have all these, human institutions that are designed to assist that process, such as journalism. Journalism has standards for verifying facts that it reports on, and various things like that. And all of that is being eroded because the large language models are hoovering up the text information, and then they're spitting out their own versions of it, and all of that verification process is not present. So the assumption basically is that the makers of the large language models like people to believe that they're super intelligent because then they will trust them and then they will use them. And then when they use the models, then more data can be gathered to train the models further. And so it's just in the business interests of the companies making these to sort of encourage this unrealistic view of what a large language model is actually doing.
Well, and that's a great point because we've been noticing, we actually had talked about this a little earlier in the month about how AI seems to be really being pushed at consumers. It's not that the consumers are asking for this AI, all of these AI features and the LLMs, but it's being forcibly put on people, right? Like you said with Google, the summary's up at the top, like
Yes.
right front and center. It's hard to get to the other information because AI is so in your face. So
Yeah, and that's because, I mean, so there are people who use it and it's useful for them, but it's not clear that the technology is meeting some sort of need that's been expressed by consumers. The technology is meeting a need of employers to have, to not have to pay people to do the kind of knowledge work that experts used to do in technology companies. So the customer is the employer that's going to benefit from it more than the person who's using it, in my view.
Absolutely. And you've used the term technofascism a couple times. And you wrote elsewhere, I think on LinkedIn, maybe on other social platforms too, that you thought at one point it might be fun to write about generative AI and in technofascism, but it's really not. It's kind of agonizing. So hopefully it's not so agonizing that you'll stop doing it. But tell us what you meant.
Well, I'll tell you what I meant, and this also intersects with a whole interesting biographical story that led me to decide to write about this topic. And that is, so first of all, as we've already touched on, I was working at Twitter. I loved that job. I was so happy to have it. Got fired from that. Then I briefly worked at a small generative AI writing company. So they have, I'm not going to name the company, but it was a small company that made writing tools, AI based writing tools. I worked there briefly, and then after ChatGPT came out, they really changed the way they started working. And I also had a heart attack while I was working there, and not so long after I had a heart attack, they decided to fire me. And so I was I was lying in the hospital recovering from my heart attack after really almost dying, and I was just thinking, what do I want to do? Like, do I want to continue to work in this field, which has now led me to this situation? And I decided, no, I would not find it fulfilling to continue to work in artificial intelligence. So I thought, do you know what? I really enjoyed writing my first book. I think I might write another book. So that's sort of where the whole idea came from. It's coming out of this personal personal trauma, I guess I would say.
it was great. It was great. Actually, you'd mentioned your first book. You wrote a book called Microstyle: The Art of Writing Little in 2011.
Yeah.
And we've heard that you're currently working on a second book. What's that book about?
Well, that book is about these issues that we're talking about. It's really about, it's my presenting my views about what reliance on generative AI is doing to us culturally. And that's really the focus of the book. And so our conversation is relevant to the writing that's ongoing.
Do you have a working title for the book?
I do, but it's not. I don't have a deal for this book yet. This is proposal stage. So I'm always a little reluctant to start promoting it when I don't have a deal. But I'll tell you my working title, because that's going to go into the proposal anyway. And the working title is "The Machines Learn So We Don't Have to." And then I think the subtitle is going to be "Generative AI and the War on Meaning." And so I word it that way because it ties it into things I've studied as a linguist. What makes language meaningful? And so that's kind of the intellectual perspective from which I'm discussing that.
Oh, I love that, especially with what we're working on. There's a lot of question about meaning right now as AI has been coming on the scene, right? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to work? What does it mean to create? Where is the value in the things that we create? I know you had a post that was, talking about how you'll post all the time about generative AI, and then every now and then about the band Wet Leg, right? And how it embodies the kind of DIY human creativity you like to promote.
Yes.
What is genuine human creativity to you? Like, why would you say it matters?
Because it's what makes life beautiful. I mean, it's us doing the things that we find pleasurable and beautiful. And I wonder why people would want to turn that over to a machine. I don't understand the desire. It's getting back again to the issue of who's really benefiting from these models? And so there's that. And then I have a whole little thing I would like to say about the meaning side.
Sure.
Okay. And that is, so when I went to graduate school and I was at Berkeley, the Berkeley at that time could be considered sort of the capital of what was known as cognitive linguistics. And cognitive linguistics, if you can read about the history of linguistics, and cognitive linguistics was a branch that, it grew out of work that was done by Noam Chomsky, or that had been started and inspired by Noam Chomsky. But there was a group of researchers who felt frustrated that Noam Chomsky wasn't giving meaning an appropriate role in their theory of language. And so there were scholars who were thinking about, well, how does meaning actually shape? Well, just for very simple starters, how do we talk about word meanings? How does meaning shape grammatical structure? And so forth. So those are all the kinds of topics that I focused on. And one of the sort of philosophical perspectives that was associated with cognitive linguistics was the idea of embodied cognition, that we have the ideas. When I say we, I mean we humans have the ideas we do because of the bodies we have. And there are all sorts of implications that are relevant to some of the topics I just mentioned, such as we have evolved to be good at moving around in space and mapping out space in our minds. And this is a big part of our cognition, our interaction with the physical world and our movements through space and actions in space. This is the basis of our cognition. And you see it if you study metaphor systems, you'll notice that a lot of metaphors that are kind of embedded right into the language are built on spatial concepts. And so, people have these ideas about how, well, we actually have like innate abilities that help us deal with the spatial world. And those have gotten recruited by language as a cognitive system in particular ways. And so language is kind of built on top of all of that. Now, so this is why when you start talking about large language models, they don't have any of that. They don't have bodies. They don't have minds. They don't have experience. They don't have any independent experiences to provide a basis for truth in the stuff that they produce. So a model doesn't know, people keep on talking about hallucinations. And that's, first of all, it's an example of anthropomorphizing. So it's an example of pretending like we're talking about a person. A machine can't hallucinate. But also, it's not really an apt metaphor, because a machine it doesn't have any concept of whether what it's saying is true or false. It just puts the words together in a string. And often what gets spit out, it seems true to us because it's all been taken by things that human beings have written. And if you make a generalization over a bunch of things that people have written, often the true repeated things, or actually the things that are repeated a lot, tend to be true. The lies tend to, be outlying data points that aren't going to affect the model a lot. So there's, a sort of a theory built into what makes things true in a large language model, but it has nothing to do with anything resembling a human ability to evaluate the truth or falsity of a statement. And so this is, to me, one of the most dangerous aspects of large language models.
Wow, that's a great statement. I really like that.
Good.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we found ourselves doing at our little institute is working to elevate human creativity above all of this kind of AI slop that's out there, because a lot of things are being extruded, are being generated. And we think it's important for many of the reasons that you said. What's fascinating is helping people to understand why human creativity is important has been difficult to define in words because it's such an intrinsic part of us. It's kind of like saying error is important. You can't really see error, you can't feel it, but when it's not there, right?
Yeah.
That's how we feel about human creativity, that this is a vital part of our existence, of our daily experience, of our daydreaming, of our visioning. And when it's gone, we won't have curiosity. We won't have technological innovation. We won't have the ability to really actually be curious about each other too. So social ties will fray and weaken. And so that's been interesting. And I wondered if you had some thoughts about human creativity as well. We talked earlier about it, but in this context.
Yes. So one important aspect of creativity in my mind is communication. That no, I'm talking about creativity in the sort of artistic sense or literary sense.
Yeah.
That we judge creativity when something is communicating to us. And that, it factors into how we interpret the I'll focus again on text now. How do we interpret when we read a novel or read a nonfiction work? The process of interpretation is not just a matter of extracting bits of information from words, but it's of thinking about why did the author put it that way? Why did the author make the choices that the author made? But this isn't a general idea that applies to any sort of creative expression. Like if you're looking at a painting, you get interested about why did the artist choose to picked this object in this way. That's part of the meaning of the work, and it's because and that is intrinsically a process of communication because we're making inferences about what was going on in somebody's mind when they came up with that. And if you take that away, then it's hard to even really talk about whatever product you're contemplating as being creative because there's no, so if I get a bunch of information from the spit out by ChatGPT, a bunch of text, I can't ask any of those questions about it. I can't ask why did the large language model choose to express it that way? Because the answer is always the same. It did because that's how the number crunching turned out. There's no conceptual motivation for anything that you'd observe in the output. So there is no. It's not creativity. When you're looking at text spit out, it's not creative. When you're looking at generated images, it's not creative. It's just because there's no communication.
I think that I really appreciate that perspective and definitely agree with it.
Mhm.
I actually wanted to ask another question too, because this has sort of been burning in my mind. We talked with an incredibly intelligent gentleman who is looking at applying language models as a tool set in the medical industry and making it so that to help with different patient charts and notes and things like that.
Yeah.
And he was commenting on how it was incredibly difficult because the model would identify that it was being studied. It would try to output the thing it was equating to what you wanted, right? And he was reflecting on how he was trying to use the right words. And what stood out to me is inherently in English, there's a lot, and since it's a language learning model, there's a lot of words that mean good, bad, right? You can infer this
Mm.
intention or meaning behind it. And I imagine that skews the models. It's part of the thing that informs them. Is there differences between language learning models trained in different languages as far as their foundations go? Has anyone looked at that, studied that?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to it. I can't claim to know the answer, but nice question.
It's just really stood out to me as somebody who appreciates language. I would be interested to see how these models continue to shift and differences
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
based on language. Yeah.
Yeah, but so I want to be very upfront about one thing, which is that I had a brief encounter with generative AI as somebody working in an artificial intelligence company, but then I quickly lost that job. And after that, I was not really interested in like trying to understand how can I make a large language model really understand because I don't think there's any conceptual basis for it. So why should I spend my time thinking about it? I prefer to not even think about that. What I want to think about is language and how language works. And what I know about language is it contradicts what so many people are claiming about large language models that is extremely frustrating to me. So one of my big motivations is the corruption of our public discourse about language. And that's one of the things I would like to remedy in the book that I'm working on.
I like that. Well, I'm certainly excited to read that book. So keep us posted.
I'll let you know how that all pans out.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a great conversation, and we'd love to talk to you further about what we're doing here. Today was more about you, but would love to come back to you and fill you in. And thank you so much for all the thoughts that you shared.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for asking me. It was a pleasure to speak to both of you.
Absolutely.
You can find out more about any of these news items and hear the complete interview on the extended premium version of our podcast at humanintelligence.news. Today's episode was produced by Ned Hayes and engineered by Muhammad Adnan. Our analog-only human-themed music was created for the Human Intelligence podcast by Josh Pinkston of Nature and Spirit. This episode, and every episode, is brought to you by the Human Intelligence Institute team. That's all for Human Intelligence. Thanks for listening to today's episode. As always, this episode is available online at humanintelligence.news.